The papers hit my kitchen table with the weight of finality. David's signature sprawled across the bottom in that arrogant flourish I'd once found charming. Now it just looked like another lie written in expensive ink. Irreconcilable differences, I read aloud to my empty kitchen, my voice echoing off the granite countertops David had insisted we needed. The same countertops I'd worked double shifts to help pay for while he pursued his art. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Marina. Coffee later? Need to hear how the gallery opening went. I stared at the message, remembering last night's humiliation. David's opening at the prestigious Meridian Gallery, where I'd stood in my clearance rack dress watching him bask in praise for paintings I'd helped finance through 3 years of 60-hour work weeks. The same paintings he'd signed with a flourish while dismissing every suggestion I'd ever made about his work. Not now, I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly. Big news to process. The divorce papers detailed everything with clinical precision. Division of assets, spousal support, custody arrangements for our 5-year-old daughter, Emma. David wanted primary custody, claiming my erratic work schedule made me an unfit primary parent. The same work schedule that had kept food on our table and paint on his canvases. I picked up one document, scanning the legal language that would dissolve 7 years of marriage. At the bottom, a business card was paperclipped to the page. Harrison and Associates, Family Law. David's lawyer. What caught my attention wasn't the firm's name, but the handwritten note on the back. Mrs. Chen, there are matters we need to discuss privately. Please call at your earliest convenience. Richard Harrison, Esky, my maiden name. David's lawyer had written my maiden name, though I'd been Mrs. Williams for 7 years. The notation felt deliberate, almost respectful. Strange, considering he was representing the man trying to destroy my life. I set the papers aside and walked to Emma's room. She was at David's mother's house for the weekend, giving him time to prepare for what he'd called our necessary conversation about our future. Looking at her empty bed with its carefully arranged stuffed animals, I felt the familiar stab of protective fury that had sustained me through years of David's casual cruelties. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity of impending change. 3 stories of suburban perfection, each room a monument to compromises I'd made to keep David happy. The formal dining room we'd never used because he preferred eating in front of his easel. The home office that had become his second studio, leaving me to work from the kitchen table. The master bedroom where I'd spent countless nights alone while he found inspiration in his downtown studio apartment. I pulled out my laptop and Googled Harrison and Associates. The website was understated, but impressive, with a client list that included several high-profile divorces I'd read about in the society pages. Richard Harrison's bio described him as a specialist in complex asset division and high-net-worth family law. High net worth. I almost laughed. David and I lived paycheck to paycheck, despite my decent salary as a marketing director at Chen & Associates Marketing. The irony of working at a firm that shared my maiden name wasn't lost on me. It was the closest I'd come to maintaining my own identity after marrying David. My phone rang, interrupting my research. David's number. Have you reviewed the documents? His voice carried that familiar tone of barely contained impatience, as if my emotional processing was inconveniencing his schedule. I'm looking at them now, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Good. We need to discuss the timeline. I'd prefer to finalize everything before Emma starts kindergarten in the fall. Of course you would. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Catherine, let's keep this civilized. You know this marriage has been over for years. We're just making it official. I thought about the years I'd worked extra, hours to pay for his art supplies while he criticized my lack of vision. The gallery openings where I'd networked tirelessly to help his career while he flirted with collectors and forgot to introduce me as his wife. The family dinners where he'd lecture Emma about the importance of following your passion while completely ignoring her drawings. What about Emma? I asked. She'll adjust. Children are resilient. And frankly, with your work schedule, She'll probably see you just as much under the new arrangement. The casual dismissal of our daughters. Emotional welfare was so typical of David that I almost missed the deeper implication. Almost preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My work schedule that pays for your art supplies? That same schedule. Catherine, I'm not doing this with you. Call my lawyer if you want to negotiate terms. Otherwise, sign the papers and let's move forward like adults. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the business card again. Harrison and Associates. The handwritten note with my maiden name. Something about it nagged at me. A professional instinct honed through years of marketing campaigns where every detail mattered. On impulse, I dialed the number. Harrison and Associates. This is Margaret. I'd like to speak with Mr. Harrison, please. This is Catherine Chen, Williams, about the Williams divorce case. One moment, please. The hold music was classical, expensive sounding. I found myself pacing the kitchen, past the breakfast nook where Emma did her homework, past the window overlooking the garden I'd planted but David had never helped maintain. Mrs. Chen. The voice was warm, professional, with a slight Boston accent. Thank you for calling. I was hoping you would. Mr. Harrison, I have to say this is unusual. You represent my husband, and yet, yes, about that. Mrs. Chen, are you free for a meeting this afternoon? There are some matters regarding your case that I believe you should be aware of before proceeding. I paused, confused. I don't understand. Aren't you working for David? I am representing Mr. Williams, yes, but there are certain discoveries that have come to light during our preparation that I believe you should know about, as a matter of professional ethics. What kind of discoveries? The kind that require a face-to-face conversation in a secure environment. Are you familiar with the Blackstone building downtown? My office is on the 30th floor. I glanced at the clock. It was Saturday afternoon, an odd time for a legal meeting. Mr. Harrison, I'm not sure I'm comfortable meeting with my husband's lawyer without representation of my own. Mrs. Chen, what I'm about to share with you will help you obtain the best possible representation. And may I suggest you use your maiden name when you come in? Ask for the Chen consultation. The receptionist will understand. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. Chen consultation? The same name as my marketing firm? The same name he'd written on his business card? 20 minutes later, I was in my car driving toward downtown Seattle. I'd changed from my weekend clothes into a business suit, armor for whatever battle was about to begin. The divorce papers sat in my passenger seat like a passenger I couldn't shake. The Blackstone building was one of those gleaming towers that housed the city's most prestigious law firms. The lobby was all marble and brass, designed to intimidate. I approached the reception desk, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I'm here for the Chen consultation, I said, testing the words. The receptionist, an elegant woman in her 40s, looked up sharply. Of course. 30th floor. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished doors. I looked professional, composed. Nothing like the woman who'd been served divorce papers that morning. The elevator climbed smoothly, each floor bringing me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The Harrison and Associates offices were understated luxury. Rich wood paneling, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Margaret? The woman I'd spoken to on the phone led me through a maze of corridors to a corner office. Richard Harrison stood as I entered. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything. His handshake was firm, his manner somehow both professional and conspiratorial. Mrs. Chen, please sit down. Can Margaret get you anything? Coffee? Water? Just answers, I said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He smiled at that, an expression that seemed both admiring and sympathetic. Straight to the point. I appreciate that. He moved to his desk, pulling out a thick file. Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share with you is privileged information that came to light during my representation of your husband. Normally, I would not be able to discuss this with you. But certain discoveries have created an ethical obligation that supersedes attorney-client privilege, particularly when those discoveries indicate potential fraud against you personally. My mouth went dry. What kind of fraud? Harrison opened the file, revealing what looked like financial documents, photographs, and correspondence. Mrs. Chen, how much do you know about your husband's family background? What does that have to do with anything? David's parents died when he was young. He was raised by his aunt in Portland. He doesn't like to talk about it. And his aunt? What was her name? I frowned, searching my memory. Honestly, he never mentioned her name. Just called her Aunt Grace. She died a few years before we met. David said it was too painful to discuss. Harrison nodded, making a note. And your husband's current financial situation? His assets, debts, income sources? He's an artist. He has some savings from his aunt's estate, enough to cover his studio rent and supplies. Everything else comes from my income. The words tasted bitter. Years of sacrifice distilled into one stark sentence. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you about your own family background, specifically your father's business history. I stiffened. My father? What does he have to do with David's divorce filing? Bear with me. Your father, Chen Wei-ming, immigrated to Seattle in the 1970s and built a successful import business, correct? Yes, but I don't see how that's relevant to... And when he passed away 5 years ago, he left his entire estate to your mother, with a trust fund established for you and any children you might have. I stood up abruptly. Mr. Harrison, how do you know about my father's will? That information is private, and frankly, it has nothing to do with my marriage to David. Harrison's expression was grave. Mrs. Chen, please sit down. I'm afraid it has everything to do with your marriage. Something in his tone made me sink back into the chair. My hands felt cold despite the warm office. Your father's estate, Harrison continued carefully, included not just his import business, but several properties in Seattle's International District, a warehouse facility, and investments that have appreciated significantly since his death. According to the probate records, the total value at the time of his death was approximately $12 million. I shook my head. That's impossible. My mother lives modestly. She never mentioned anything about significant assets. The trust structure your father established was quite sophisticated. Your mother receives a comfortable monthly stipend, but the bulk of the estate remains in trust until you reach age 35, or in the event of your mother's death, whichever comes first. I don't understand. I'm 33. No one ever told me about any trust fund. Harrison pulled out a photograph from the file. It showed a man I didn't recognize shaking hands with David outside what looked like a law office. Mrs. Chen, this photograph was taken 3 weeks ago. The man with your husband is Trevor Blackwood, an estate attorney specializing in trust manipulation. My vision blurred slightly. Trust manipulation? Mrs. Chen, your husband has known about your inheritance for the entire duration of your marriage. The timing of this divorce, filed just 18 months before you turned 35, is not coincidental. I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting perfectly still. That's impossible. David doesn't know anything about my family's finances. My mother and I never discussed money, and she certainly never mentioned any trust fund. Harrison pulled out another document. This is a private investigator's report commissioned by your husband 2 months into your dating relationship. It details your family's financial background, your father's business holdings, and the specific terms of his estate planning. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what he was telling me. You're saying David investigated my family's finances while we were dating? I'm saying your husband has spent 7 years positioning himself for access to your inheritance. The divorce filing, the custody demands, even his choice of legal representation, it's all part of a calculated plan. I thought about our courtship, how David had seemed so interested in my family history, so sympathetic about my father's death. How he'd encouraged me to stay close to my mother while maintaining that he preferred to keep our finances separate. How he'd insisted we use my income for daily expenses while his inheritance from his aunt remained untouched. The aunt, I whispered. There was no aunt, was there? Harrison's expression was grim. There was an aunt, but she didn't die. She lives quite comfortably in Portland, and she's never heard of David Williams. Then where did his money come from? Mrs. Chen, your husband's legal name is actually David Winchester. He changed it to Williams 6 months before you met. The money he's claimed came from his aunt's estate was actually an advance against your future inheritance, obtained through forged documents and identity theft. The walls of the elegant office seemed to be closing in. I struggled to breathe, my mind racing through 7 years of lies, manipulation, and calculated deception. But why are you telling me this? You're his lawyer. Harrison leaned forward, his expression intense. Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand something about how I practice law. I specialize in high-net-worth divorces, but I also have a very specific ethical standard. When I discover that a client is attempting to defraud their spouse through the legal system, I have an obligation to act. But the attorney-client privilege is superseded when a crime is being committed through my representation. Your husband has been using my firm to legitimize a complex fraud scheme. The moment I discovered the scope of his deception, my ethical obligations shifted. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of believing I was married to a struggling artist who loved me despite my practical nature. 7 years of supporting a man who had been systematically stealing my future. Mrs. Chen, Harrison said gently, I need to ask you something very important. Have you ever signed any financial documents that your husband presented to you? Powers of attorney? Loan applications, investment authorizations? I thought back through our marriage, through all the times David had asked me to sign papers for administrative purposes, the mortgage application for our house, the business license for his art studio, the life insurance policies. Oh God, I whispered. The life insurance. He said we needed it for Emma's future. I signed papers making him the beneficiary of a policy on my life. Harrison nodded grimly. A $2 million policy taken out 6 months ago, just after your husband learned about the specific timeline for your inheritance distribution. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's not just trying to divorce me for my money. He's... Mrs. Chen, I can't speculate about your husband's ultimate intentions, but I can tell you that the pattern of behavior my investigation has uncovered suggests someone who sees you not as a wife, but as a financial asset to be maximized. I stood up again, this time moving to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, David was probably in his studio, painting another masterpiece funded by my ignorance. Emma was at his mother's house, building memories with grandparents who might not even be her real grandparents. What do? I asked without turning around. First, you get your own legal representation. Someone who specializes in fraud cases and asset protection. Do you have a recommendation? As a matter of fact, I do. Harrison pulled out another business card. Diana Chang and Associates. She's the best forensic family lawyer in the state. She also happens to specialize in cases involving Asian American families and inheritance fraud. I turned from the window, studying his face. You've been planning this conversation for a while, haven't you? Mrs. Chen, I've been investigating your husband for 3 weeks. Ever since certain inconsistencies in his documentation came to light, what I found disturbed me enough to risk my professional reputation by contacting you. What kind of inconsistencies? Harrison hesitated, then pulled out one final document. Mrs. Chen, this is a copy of a life insurance claim form. Filled out but not filed. It's dated for next month, listing you as deceased due to a hiking accident. The blood drained from my face. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. A hiking accident? Your husband has been researching wilderness areas in the Cascades. He's purchased specialized hiking equipment and has been meeting with someone who works for a wilderness survival company. The same company that provides expertise for insurance investigations of wilderness accidents. I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years, who'd held our daughter at her birth, who'd kissed me goodbye that very morning, was planning my murder. Mrs. Chen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are in immediate danger. The divorce papers your husband served you today are not just about ending your marriage. They're about positioning himself legally for whatever comes next. But Emma is also at risk. If something were to happen to you before your inheritance vests, and if your husband had primary custody of Emma, he would have legal standing to claim her share of the trust as her guardian. I thought about Emma, sweet and trusting, who adored her father because he let her stay up late and eat ice cream for breakfast when I wasn't looking, who had no idea that her father saw her as a financial instrument. What do? I whispered again. You fight, Harrison said simply. You get ahead of his plan, you protect yourself and your daughter, and you make sure he pays for every lie he's told and every dollar he's stolen. But how? He's had years to plan this. I'm just finding out about it now. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since I'd entered his office, it was a genuine expression of warmth and confidence. Mrs. Chen, your husband made one critical error in his planning. What's that? He assumed you were as naive and helpless as he's spent 7 years convincing you that you are. But the woman who built a successful marketing career while supporting a family, who managed to maintain her professional identity despite years of manipulation, who raised a daughter while working 60-hour weeks, that woman is not helpless. I felt something stirring in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger, but something harder and more focused. Determination. What's the first step? You call Diana Chang. Today. You tell her everything I've told you. And you start building a case not just for divorce, but for criminal fraud charges. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, feeling the familiar confidence that had carried me through countless business presentations and marketing campaigns. And David? David continues with his plan, completely unaware that his wife now knows everything. You give him no indication that anything has changed. You act surprised by the divorce papers, hurt but cooperative. You let him think he's winning. For how long? Harrison consulted his calendar. Diana Chang is in court Monday morning, but she can see you Monday afternoon. That gives you tonight and tomorrow to act normally, to gather any additional information you can, and to prepare for the fight of your life. I picked up the business card for Diana Chang, sliding it into my purse next to the divorce papers that had started this nightmare. Mr. Harrison, why are you helping me? Really? He was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Mrs. Chen, I've spent 20 years practicing family law. I've seen every kind of marital dissolution, every type of financial manipulation, every form of spousal abuse. But I've never seen someone systematically plan another person's murder for money while maintaining the facade of a loving marriage. So this is about justice? This is about preventing a crime and ensuring that a little girl doesn't lose her mother to a man who sees her as a business asset. I walked to the door, then turned back. One more question. How did you know to use my maiden name? How did you know I would respond to being called Mrs. Chen? Harrison's smile was enigmatic. Mrs. Chen, your husband isn't the only one who knows how to conduct research. The difference is, I conducted mine to help you, not to harm you. As I left the Blackstone building, the afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner. I had been served divorce papers that morning as Catherine Williams, naive wife of a struggling artist. I was leaving as Catherine Chen, a woman with resources, allies, and a very dangerous enemy who didn't yet know he'd been exposed. The drive home passed in a blur of planning and possibilities. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already begun to see my life differently. The house I'd thought of as our dream home was now evidence of David's fraud. The artwork hanging on my walls were proof of my years of unwitting financial support for his criminal activities. David's car wasn't in the driveway. According to his usual Saturday routine, he would be at his studio until evening, probably working on pieces for his next show. The same studio I'd helped him afford, filled with paintings created with materials I'd purchased, in a space I'd helped him lease. I walked through the house methodically, seeing everything with new eyes. In David's home office, I photographed documents, bank statements, anything that might be relevant to Diana Chang's investigation. In our bedroom, I found the hiking gear Harrison had mentioned, still in shopping bags, hidden in the back of David's closet. My phone rang. David again. Hey, I answered, proud of how normal my voice sounded. How are you doing with everything? I know this morning was a lot to process. The concern in his voice was so perfectly calibrated. so practiced. How many times had he rehearsed this conversation? "I'm managing," I said. "It's a big change, but you're right. We haven't been happy for a while. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. It'll be easier for Emma if we can keep things amicable." "Of course. Whatever's best for Emma. I'll be home around 7. Maybe we can talk about next steps then?" "Sure. I'll make dinner." "Thanks, Kat. I know this isn't easy, but we're doing the right thing." I hung up and stared at my phone. He'd called me Kat, the nickname he'd used when we were dating, when he was still pretending to be the man who loved me. Tonight I would sit across from my husband at our dinner table, making conversation about our daughter's school schedule and our divorce timeline, while knowing that he was planning my murder. I would smile and nod and play the part of the cooperative soon-to-be ex-wife while building a case to destroy him completely. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced in years. David had spent 7 years teaching me to doubt myself, to minimize my capabilities, to see myself through his dismissive eyes. But he'd made a crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated Catherine Chen. As the afternoon faded into evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the divorce papers one more time, preparing for the performance of my life. Tomorrow I would begin to take back everything he'd stolen from me. Tonight I would let him think he was winning. After all, the best battles were won before the enemy knew the war had begun. Sunday morning arrived with the familiar sounds of David moving through our kitchen, the coffee machine grinding beans, the gentle clink of dishes. I listened from our bedroom, marveling at how normal everything sounded when my entire world had shifted on its axis. Morning. "Beautiful," David called as I entered the kitchen, already dressed for the day, in clothes carefully chosen to project calm normalcy. "Coffee's ready." He handed me my favorite mug, the one Emma had painted for Mother's Day last year with wonky flowers and "Best Mom" spelled in careful 6-year-old letters. The gesture felt like another piece of evidence in the case I was building against him. "Thank you," I said, accepting the coffee and studying his face over the rim. 7 years of marriage, and I'd never noticed how his smiles never quite reached his eyes when he thought I wasn't paying attention. "I was thinking," David said, settling into his chair with his own coffee, "maybe we should tell Emma about the divorce today when she gets back from Mom's. Get it over with." "Don't you think we should have a plan first? About custody? Living arrangements?" "I've been thinking about that too." David's voice carried that reasonable tone he used when he was about to present something he'd already decided. "It might be less disruptive if Emma stays here with me during the week. Keeps her routine stable. You could have weekends." I forced myself to sip my coffee calmly while my mind raced. He was moving fast, trying to establish custody patterns before I could object, before I could hire my own lawyer or understand my rights. "That's a big change," I said carefully. "Emma's used to me being here for breakfast, helping with homework. But your work schedule is so demanding. Remember when you missed her school play because of that client emergency? This way, she'd have more stability." The guilt was expertly applied. David had always been masterful at using my professional obligations against me, making me feel like every business trip or late meeting was a betrayal of my family. Now I understood it was part of a larger strategy. "I suppose we could try it," I said, watching his face carefully. "Temporarily." Relief flickered across his features so quickly I almost missed it. "Great. I think it's the right choice for everyone." My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lunch today? Haven't seen you in weeks. Perfect timing." If there really was a trust fund, my mother would know about it. And if David had been lying about that too, I needed to understand the scope of his deception. "Mom wants to have lunch," I told David. "Mind if I head out for a few hours?" "Of course not. Take your time. I'll pick up Emma around 3. I gathered my purse and keys, pausing at the door. "David, are you sure about all this? The divorce, the custody arrangement? Once we start down this path?" He stood up, crossing to me with that same concerned expression he'd worn yesterday. "Kat, we haven't been happy for a long time. You know that. We're just finally being honest about it." His hands found my shoulders, and for a moment I wondered if I was wrong about everything. If maybe the man I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, buried under years of disappointment and artistic struggle. Then I remembered the life insurance forms, the hiking equipment, the forged documents Harrison had shown me. "You're right," I said, leaning into his touch with practiced ease. "We deserve better than what we've become." He kissed my forehead, and I wondered if he could feel how my skin crawled at his touch. 20 minutes later, I sat across from my mother at her favorite dim sum restaurant in the International District. Li Wei Chen looked younger than her 68 years, her silver hair perfectly styled, her simple but expensive clothes speaking to quiet prosperity. "You look tired." "Darling," she said in Mandarin, then switched to English as she always did when she noticed. "Is everything all right?" I studied my mother's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. "Mom, I need to ask you something important about Dad's estate." Her chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. "What about it? Was there more to Dad's will than you told me? Any trust funds or larger assets?" My mother set down her chopsticks carefully, her expression becoming guarded. "Why are you asking about this now? David and I are getting divorced. There are questions about asset division, and I need to understand our complete financial picture." "Divorced?" My mother's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday. He filed papers. Mom, please, about Dad's estate." My mother reached across the table, taking my hands in hers. "Catherine, there are things about your father's business that I never discussed with you. Things I hoped you would never need to know." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "Your father was not just an importer. He was, how do you say, a facilitator? He helped other Chinese families establish businesses in America, provided connections, financial backing. Some of these arrangements were very profitable." "How profitable?" My mother glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer. "When your father died, his estate was valued at over $15 million. There is a trust fund that will become yours when you turn 35, or if something happens to me." The number hit me like a physical blow. Harrison had been conservative in his estimates. "15 million? Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because your father made me promise to let you build your own life first. He didn't want money to change who you became. He said if you knew about the inheritance too young, you might not develop the strength to handle it properly." I thought about David, about his careful cultivation of our relationship, his knowledge of my family's financial situation before he'd even proposed. "Mom, has anyone ever contacted you about the trust? Lawyers, financial advisors, anyone asking questions about Dad's estate?" "Actually, yes. About 2 years ago, a man came to the house. He said he was conducting a survey about Asian American business ownership for a university study. He asked many questions about your father's business partners, his investments." "What did this man look like?" "Tall, brown hair, very handsome. He said his name was David Winchester." The dim sum restaurant spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting nausea. "Winchester?" "Yes. He was very polite, very interested in our family history. He even brought flowers for your father's memorial shrine." David had been in my mother's house, had spoken with her about my father's business, had gathered intelligence about our family's finances while sitting in our living room, drinking tea and expressing sympathy for our loss. "Mom, did you tell him about the trust fund?" "Of course not. I never discuss family financial matters with strangers. But he was very persistent with his questions about your father's business partnerships." I pulled out my phone, showing her a photo of David from our wedding. "Is this the man who came to see you?" My mother's face went pale. "Catherine, that's your husband." "Yes. And his real name is David Winchester, not David Williams." The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of David's deception. He had researched my family for months before our first meeting, had positioned himself at the charity gala where we'd met, had cultivated our relationship with surgical precision. "There's more," my mother said quietly as we finished our meal. 6 months ago, another man came to the house. This one said he was from the bank that manages your father's trust. He wanted to verify some information before your 35th birthday. "What kind of information?" Details about your marriage, your husband's background, your daughter's birth certificate. I didn't tell him anything, but Catherine, I'm worried that someone is trying to manipulate the trust fund. I reached across the table, squeezing my mother's hands. Mom, I need you to be very careful. Don't let anyone into the house who you don't know. Don't discuss our family's finances with anyone, no matter who they claim to be. Are you in danger? The question hung between us like a shadow. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. After lunch, I drove directly to Chang & Associates, the law firm Richard Harrison had recommended. Diana Chang had agreed to see me on an emergency basis, and her office was in a sleek building in Bellevue that spoke to serious money and serious expertise. Diana Chang was my age, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes and an aura of competence that immediately put me at ease. Her office was modern and efficient, with diplomas from Harvard Law and photos of her with prominent Asian American business leaders. Mrs. Chen, she said, rising to greet me. Richard Harrison briefed me on your situation. What he's described as one of the most sophisticated inheritance fraud schemes I've encountered. I settled into the chair across from her desk, feeling the weight of the weekend's revelations. It's even worse than Mr. Harrison knows. I just learned that my husband has been researching my family's finances for years, using false identities to gather information. Diana opened a legal pad, her pen poised. Tell me everything. For the next 2 hours, I laid out the complete picture. David's false identity, his investigation of my family, his cultivation of our relationship, the timing of the divorce filing, the life insurance policy, and the evidence of his planned hiking accident. Diana listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. Mrs. Chen, she said finally, we're not just dealing with inheritance fraud. We're looking at identity theft, insurance fraud, stalking, and potentially conspiracy to commit murder. What are my options? We have several paths forward. First, we need to immediately secure your safety and your daughter's. Second, we need to freeze any assets David might try to access. Third, we need to build a criminal case that will put him away for decades. Diana pulled out a thick folder. I've already started researching your husband's background. David Winchester has a criminal history in Oregon. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. He's done this before. The room tilted slightly. Done what before? Targeted wealthy women for their inheritances. There was a case 5 years ago in Portland. A woman named Michelle Roberts, heir to a timber fortune. Winchester married her, convinced her to name him as beneficiary on a life insurance policy. Then she died in a car accident. I couldn't breathe. Was he charged? The case was ruled accidental death. Winchester collected $2 million in life insurance and disappeared. Michelle's family suspected foul play but couldn't prove it. So he's done this before. Successfully. Diana nodded grimly. Which is why we're not taking any chances with your safety. Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand something. Your husband is not just a con man. He's a killer. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I thought about Emma, innocent and trusting, who had no idea her father was a monster. What do I do about my daughter? We're going to make sure she's protected. I have contacts with Child Protective Services and law enforcement. But first, we need to gather more evidence. Diana outlined a plan that was both terrifying and empowering. I would continue to act normally, giving David no indication that I knew about his scheme. Meanwhile, Diana would coordinate with law enforcement to build a criminal case. Richard Harrison would provide documentation of David's fraud attempts, and I would wear a wire to record any incriminating conversations. The key, Diana explained, is to let him think his plan is working while we build an ironclad case. We need him to reveal more details about his scheme, preferably in his own words. How long will this take? Weeks, possibly months. David has been planning this for years. We need to be just as methodical in bringing him down. As I left Diana's office, I felt like I was stepping into a different life. 24 hours ago, I had been Catherine Williams, struggling wife and mother. Now I was Catherine Chen, target of a murder conspiracy and key witness in a federal investigation. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd lived in for years, but everything looked different now. Every car behind me could be surveillance. Every stranger on the sidewalk could be connected to David's scheme. The paranoia was exhausting, but Diana had been clear. Until David was arrested, I had to assume I was being watched. David's car was in the driveway when I arrived, along with his mother's SUV. Through the living room window, I could see Emma showing off a drawing to her grandmother while David watched with what looked like genuine paternal pride. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was wrong about everything. That the man playing with our daughter, laughing at her stories about her weekend adventure, couldn't possibly be planning my murder. Then David looked up and saw me through the window. His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes for just an instant. The look of a predator acknowledging its prey. I walked into the house, my own smile perfectly calibrated, my voice bright with false warmth. "Hi, everyone. How was your weekend, baby?" Emma launched herself into my arms, chattering about her sleepover with Grandma, the movies they'd watched, the special pancakes they'd made for breakfast. Normal, innocent details that felt precious now that I understood how fragile our family's safety really was. "Mom spoiled her rotten," David said, his arm sliding around my waist with practiced ease. "But she missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart," I told Emma, meaning every word. "Why don't you go wash your hands for dinner?" As Emma ran toward the bathroom, David's mother gathered her purse and jacket. "I should get going. Thank you for letting me steal her for the weekend." I brought David up and Blackwood denied any contact with him, but he suggested meeting with both of us. Perfect. That gives us an opportunity to record them together. "How soon can you arrange a meeting?" "Tonight, probably. David's been asking about my family's finances all week. Catherine, I need you to understand something. By accelerating their timeline, they're also accelerating the danger to you. We're moving the protective surveillance up to 24 hours, starting now." I looked out my office window, scanning the street below for any sign of the federal agents Diana had mentioned. Will I be able to see them? No, and that's the point. But if David makes any sudden moves, they'll be ready. That evening, I sat across from David at our dinner table, watching him help Emma with her homework while internally rehearsing the conversation I was about to initiate. The recording device felt warm against my chest, a reminder that everything we said would soon be evidence in a federal case. "Daddy, what's 7 times 8? Emma asked, chewing thoughtfully on her pencil eraser. "What do you think it is, sweetheart?" 56? "Exactly right. You're getting so good at multiplication." The pride in David's voice sounded genuine, and for a moment I wondered how someone could be a loving father while planning murder for money. Then I remembered Diana's warnings about sociopaths and their ability to compartmentalize. "Emma, why don't you finish your homework in your room?" I suggested. "Daddy and I need to talk about grown-up things." After Emma gathered her books and headed upstairs, David turned to me with an expression of mild curiosity. "Everything okay? You seem tense." "I had an interesting visitor at work today. A lawyer named Trevor Blackwood." David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of lawyer?" "Estate planning. He said there are things about my father's trust that I need to address before my 35th birthday." "What kind of things?" I pulled out the documents Trevor had left, spreading them across the table. "Asset transfers, beneficiary designations. Apparently, my father left more money than I realized." David set down his fork, his full attention now focused on the papers. "How much more?" "Blackwood wasn't specific, but he mentioned significant tax penalties if I don't act soon." I watched David's face carefully. He offered to help manage the transition. Did he mention any numbers? "Rough estimates?" He said he'd need to meet with both of us to discuss specifics. I leaned back in my chair. "David, did you know about any of this? When we got married, when we applied for the mortgage, did anyone ever mention additional assets in my family?" The question hung in the air while David appeared to consider it carefully. "No, nothing specific. Your mother always seemed comfortable, but I assumed it was just careful saving." "Blackwood wants to meet with us together. Tomorrow night, if possible. That fast?" "He says there are deadlines involved. Something about IRS regulations." David nodded slowly. and I could practically see him calculating possibilities behind his eyes. We should probably hear what he has to say. If there's really money involved, we need to understand our options. Our options? Well, with the divorce proceedings, asset division becomes more complicated. We want to make sure everything is handled properly. There it was. Not concern for my financial well-being, but calculation about how to position himself for maximum advantage. I forced myself to smile. You're right. I'll call him tomorrow and set up the meeting. Later that night, after David had retreated to his office for what he claimed was email catch-up, I used the secure phone to update Diana. The meeting is set for tomorrow night, I whispered from our bedroom. David took the bait completely. Good. We'll have surveillance teams positioned around your house and audio recording from multiple sources. This should give us everything we need to document their conspiracy. Diana, I have to ask. What happens to Emma when this all comes out? When David is arrested? She'll be safe with you. We have temporary protective custody orders prepared, and your mother has already agreed to help with childcare during the legal proceedings. My mother knows about the investigation? She knows enough. Catherine, your mother has been watching your marriage with concern for years. She's relieved that you're finally taking action. The next evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd spent the day at work in a state of controlled anxiety, going through the motions of normalcy while federal agents positioned themselves around my neighborhood. Diana had assured me that Trevor and David would reveal enough in tonight's conversation to justify arrests. But the risk felt enormous. Emma was spending the night at my mother's house, a sleepover that had been arranged with careful casualness. As David helped me clear the dinner dishes, the doorbell rang with perfect timing. That must be Blackwood, David said, his voice carrying just the right note of nervous anticipation. Trevor Blackwood entered our home like a man confident of his welcome, briefcase in hand and the same paternal smile I remembered from my office. But tonight I noticed details I'd missed before. The way his eyes cataloged our possessions, the careful note he made of our security system, the manner in which he studied David's face for recognition. Mr. Williams, Trevor said, extending his hand. Trevor Blackwood, your wife and I met yesterday to discuss her family's estate matters. Of course. Please come in. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. As David busied himself in the kitchen, Trevor settled into our living room, spreading documents across our coffee table with practiced efficiency. I took the chair closest to where I knew the surveillance equipment was positioned. Ensuring optimal audio pickup, Mrs. Williams, I've prepared additional documentation based on our conversation yesterday, Trevor began. The trust situation is even more advantageous than I initially indicated. David returned with coffee, taking the seat directly across from Trevor. My wife mentioned significant assets. Could you be more specific about the numbers involved? Trevor smiled, pulling out a folder marked with official-looking seals. Mr. Williams, your wife's father was remarkably successful. The primary trust contains approximately $15 million in various investments and properties. David's carefully controlled expression didn't change, but I saw his hand tighten imperceptibly around his coffee cup. $15 million? That's just the primary trust. There are additional smaller trusts, real estate holdings, and business partnerships that bring the total estate value to approximately $22 million. The number hung in the air like a golden lure. I watched David process the information, seeing the calculation in his eyes as he adjusted his mental planning for an even larger prize. And Mrs. Williams gains control of these assets when she turns 35? David asked. Precisely. But here's where things become complex. Trevor pulled out another document. The trust contains provisions that allow for early distribution under certain circumstances. Specifically, if Mrs. Williams faces significant financial hardship or family emergency. What constitutes a family emergency? I asked, though Diana had already prepared me for this conversation. Death of a spouse, for instance. Or incapacitation requiring long-term care. The trust's creators wanted to ensure that beneficiaries could access funds in truly dire circumstances. David leaned forward slightly. So if something happened to me, Catherine could access the money immediately? That's correct. though of course we all hope such circumstances never arise. The conversation continued for another hour, with Trevor outlining increasingly elaborate scenarios for accessing trust funds early, each more convenient for David's purposes than the last. As they spoke, I marveled at how seamlessly they performed their roles. Trevor, the helpful estate attorney, David, the concerned husband, both knowing exactly what they were really discussing. Finally, Trevor gathered his documents and prepared to leave. I'll need a few days to prepare the paperwork for asset restructuring. Mrs. Williams, could you come to my office Friday afternoon to review everything? Of course. Excellent. And Mr. Williams, thank you for the coffee. It's always a pleasure to work with couples who communicate so well about financial planning. After Trevor left, David and I sat in our living room, the weight of the evening's performance settling around us like dust. $22 million, David said finally. Catherine, do you realize what this means? It means my father was more successful than any of us knew. It means Emma's future is secure. Your future is secure. He moved to sit beside me on the couch, taking my hands in his. Even with the divorce, knowing this money exists changes everything. How so? Well, you won't need spousal support. You won't need to worry about custody arrangements affecting your financial stability. We can focus on what's best for Emma without money complications. His logic was flawless, his concern perfectly calibrated. If I hadn't known about his real plans, I might have been touched by his apparent consideration for my welfare. David, are you sure about the divorce? With everything that's happening, maybe we should reconsider. Something flickered across his face, too quickly for me to identify. Kat, money doesn't change what's broken between us. If anything, it confirms that we should end things now, while we can still be civil about it. But Emma, we'll have a mother who's financially independent and a father who wants what's best for her. That's more than most kids get. He kissed my forehead with tender finality, and I wondered if he was already imagining my funeral, already planning his performance as the grieving widower. As I lay in bed that night, listening to David's steady breathing beside me, I thought about the recording device that had captured every word of the evening's conversation. By tomorrow, Diana would have enough evidence to arrest both Trevor and David for conspiracy to commit fraud and murder. But first, I had to survive Friday's meeting with Trevor. And David's planned hiking trip. The end was coming, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. Friday morning arrived with deceptive calm. David hummed while making coffee, his mood lighter than I'd seen in months. The anticipation of $22 million had energized him in ways his art never had. Big day today, he said, kissing my cheek with theatrical affection. Your meeting with Blackwood should clarify everything. Are you nervous? I asked, testing his reaction. Why would I be nervous? This is good news, Kat. Life-changing news. Life-ending news, more accurately. But I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the trusting wife for what I hoped would be the last time. Diana had briefed me extensively on the afternoon's plan. I would meet with Trevor as scheduled, wearing multiple recording devices and a GPS tracker. Federal agents would be positioned throughout the building, ready to intervene if the meeting turned dangerous. Meanwhile, other agents would be searching David's studio and car for additional evidence. At work, I found it impossible to concentrate on marketing campaigns and client calls. Every phone ring made me jump. Every unexpected visitor to the office sent my heart racing. The weight of the recording devices felt enormous despite their tiny size. At 2 p.m., Julie knocked on my door. Catherine? There's a Detective Morrison here to see you. Says it's urgent. Detective Morrison was a tall woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She showed her badge discreetly before sitting across from my desk. Mrs. Chen, I'm working with Agent Chang on your case. We need to move up the timeline. My stomach dropped. What's happened? We found evidence in your husband's studio that suggests he's planning to act sooner than expected. Tonight, possibly. Tonight? But the hiking trip isn't until this weekend. Plans change when $22 million is at stake. Detective Morrison pulled out her phone, showing me a photograph. This was found in your husband's studio this morning. The image showed a detailed map of hiking trails in the Cascade Mountains, with specific routes marked in red. Notes in David's handwriting detailed elevation changes, cell phone dead zones, and emergency response times. "There's more," Morrison continued, swiping to the next photo. "Medical records showing your supposed history of heart problems." I stared at the forged documents, bearing my name and a fabricated cardiac condition that would make my death during strenuous hiking seem natural. "Agent Chang wants to abort the meeting with Blackwood and bring your husband in immediately." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "If we abort now, we lose our chance to record them together. Trevor will disappear, and David will claim he was manipulated by a con man. Mrs. Chen, your safety is our primary concern. My daughter's future is my primary concern. I want them both arrested with enough evidence to put them away forever." Morrison studied my face for a long moment. "Agent Chang said you might say that. She also said to give you this." She handed me a small device that looked like a panic button. "If anything feels wrong during the meeting, press this. We'll be in the building within 30 seconds. The Blackwood meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. in a downtown office building I'd never visited. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I rehearsed the conversation Diana and I had planned. The key was to get Trevor to reveal details about previous victims. Especially Michelle Roberts. Trevor's temporary office was spartanly furnished. Clearly a short-term rental designed to project legitimacy without long-term commitment. He greeted me with the same paternal warmth, but something in his eyes seemed sharper today. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for coming. I have excellent news about the trust restructuring. Before we discuss that, Mr. Blackwood, I have some questions about your firm's experience with similar cases." "Of course. What would you like to know?" "You mentioned you'd worked with other families facing similar trust transitions. Could you tell me about your success rate?" Trevor's smile became slightly strained. "As I mentioned, attorney-client privilege prevents me from sharing specific details. I understand about confidentiality, but surely you can speak generally about outcomes. Whether families have been satisfied with your services?" "Absolutely. Our clients have been very satisfied with the financial results. Even in cases where family circumstances changed unexpectedly, deaths, accidents, that sort of thing." Trevor's hands stilled on his papers. "Mrs. Williams, I'm not sure I understand the question." "Well, you mentioned that trust assets could be accessed early in cases of family emergency. I'm wondering how often that actually happens." "More frequently than you might expect. Life is unpredictable." I leaned forward slightly, ensuring optimal recording quality. "Have you handled cases where spouses died during the trust transition period?" "Mrs. Williams, I have to ask why these questions seem to focus on death and tragedy." "I'm trying to understand all possibilities. For instance, if something happened to my husband, how would that affect the trust management?" Trevor set down his pen, his expression becoming guarded. "Has something happened to your husband?" "No, of course not. I'm just trying to understand the legal implications of various scenarios." "Mrs. Williams, I think we should focus on the paperwork that needs your immediate attention." He pulled out a folder thick with documents, but his movements seemed rushed now, less confident than during our previous meetings. "These forms will restructure the trust to optimize tax advantages and provide greater liquidity access." I scanned the documents, recognizing none of the legal language but noting Diana's warning signs: requests for multiple signatures, power of attorney transfers, beneficiary changes that would give David increased access to trust funds. "Mr. Blackwood, these documents seem to give my husband significant control over the trust assets. Standard procedure for married couples. Asset protection requires coordination between spouses. But what if we divorce? These signatures would remain valid even after the marriage ends." Something flickered across Trevor's face. "Are you planning to divorce your husband, Mrs. Williams?" The question felt like a trap. Diana had prepared me for this moment. "We've discussed it. But if I'm about to inherit significant assets, perhaps we should reconsider." "Mrs. Williams, divorce proceedings can complicate estate management significantly. Sometimes it's better to simplify the situation before major asset transfers occur." "Simplify how?" Trevor leaned back in his chair, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Williams, I have to ask. Has anyone spoken to you about your husband's background?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "What kind of background?" "Financial history. Previous relationships. Business associations, should they have. Your husband has been very forthcoming about his concerns regarding this inheritance. He's worried about how sudden wealth might affect your marriage." "What concerns?" "He mentioned that you've been acting differently lately. More suspicious, asking unusual questions about family finances." The room felt smaller suddenly. Trevor knew that I knew something. The careful dance we'd been performing was over. "Mr. Blackwood, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think so, Mrs. Williams. Or should I say Mrs. Chen?" The use of my maiden name was like a physical blow. Trevor opened his briefcase, pulling out a different folder entirely. "Your husband contacted me this morning. He's concerned that someone has been filling your head with false information about his identity and intentions." I reached for the panic button in my purse, but Trevor noticed the movement. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Your husband is waiting downstairs with your daughter." The words hit me like ice water. "Emma? She's supposed to be at my mother's house." "Plans change. Your husband picked her up from school early. Family emergency," he told them. My phone buzzed with a text from David's number. "Come to the parking garage. Emma wants to see you." "Mr. Blackwood, whatever you're planning. Emma has nothing to do with this. That's entirely up to you. Mrs. Chen, you can sign these documents. Transfer the assets as planned, and your daughter stays safe. Or you can continue this investigation you've been conducting, and tonight becomes a tragic family accident. The FBI knows about you." "About David? About Michelle Roberts?" Trevor's composure cracked slightly. "You've been busy. But federal investigations take time, Mrs. Chen. Accidents happen much faster." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo. Emma sitting in David's car in what looked like an underground parking garage, holding a sign that read, "Hi, Mommy." "She's not hurt," Trevor said, noting my expression. "But her continued safety depends on your cooperation." I stood up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. The federal agents positioned throughout the building didn't know about Emma. They were prepared to arrest Trevor and David, not to handle a hostage situation involving my daughter. "What do you want me to do?" "Sign the documents. All of them. Then we take a drive to finalize some additional paperwork." "And then Emma goes free?" "Mrs. Chen, once the asset transfers are complete, your family's troubles will be over. Permanently." I looked at the documents spread across Trevor's desk, each one designed to steal my inheritance and facilitate my murder. Then I thought about Emma, innocent and trusting, sitting in a car with a man who saw her as collateral damage. "I'll sign." For the next 20 minutes, I signed document after document while Trevor watched with satisfaction. Each signature felt like another nail in my coffin, but Emma's safety was worth more than money or justice. "Excellent," Trevor said finally, gathering the papers. "Now shall we go see your family?" As we left the office, I managed to activate the panic button hidden in my purse. Whatever happened next, the federal agents would know something had gone wrong. The parking garage was dimly lit and nearly empty. David's car sat in a corner spot, Emma visible in the back seat. She waved enthusiastically when she saw me, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her. "Mommy," she called as I approached the car. "Daddy said we're going on a surprise adventure." David got out of the driver's seat, his expression a mixture of triumph and something that might have been regret. "Hello, Kat. I'm sorry it has to be this way." "Let Emma go, David. Please. She doesn't need to be part of this." "Actually, she does. A family hiking trip gone wrong is much more believable than a solo accident." Trevor opened the passenger door, gesturing for me to get in. "Mrs. Chen, time is a factor." As I reached for the door handle, the parking garage erupted with activity. Federal agents appeared from behind concrete pillars, their weapons drawn, voices echoing off the walls. "FBI. Nobody move!" David spun toward the nearest exit, but agents were already blocking his path. Trevor raised his hands slowly, his briefcase falling to the ground and spilling forged documents across the concrete. "Emma!" I shouted, running toward the car. "Stay down, baby!" Agent Chang appeared at my side, her weapon trained on David. "Catherine, get your daughter and move away from the vehicle." I opened the back door, gathering Emma into my arms. She was crying now, frightened by the shouting and flashing lights, but she was safe. "Mommy, what's happening?" "It's okay, sweetheart. The police are here to help us." As federal agents arrested David and Trevor, reading them their rights and securing evidence, I held Emma close and watched my husband's face. He wasn't looking at the agents or the weapons. He was looking at me with an expression of pure fury, as if my survival was a personal betrayal. "You have no idea what you've cost yourself," he said, as they led him toward a police car. "That money could have set Emma up for life." "That money was never yours to steal," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom listening to David Winchester and Trevor Blackwood receive their sentences. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, estate fraud. The charges filled 2 pages of legal documents. David received 25 years without possibility of parole. Trevor received 30. Neither conviction would bring back Michelle Roberts or the other victims federal investigators had uncovered, but it would prevent future murders. After the sentencing, Diana and I stood on the courthouse steps in bright spring sunshine. Emma was with my mother, finally safe and beginning to understand that her father had been a bad man who wouldn't be coming home. "How are you holding up?" Diana asked. "Some days are harder than others." Emma asks about David sometimes. I don't know how to explain that her father tried to kill her mother for money. You tell her the truth, age appropriately, that some people make very bad choices, but that doesn't mean she's responsible for them. I thought about the $22 million sitting in trust accounts, managed now by legitimate financial advisors who had no interest in my death. The money my father had worked so hard to accumulate would eventually fund Emma's education and secure our future. Exactly as he'd intended. "Diana, I have something to ask you. Anything. I want to create a foundation in my father's name, something that helps other women who've been targeted by marriage fraud." Diana smiled. "I think that's exactly what your father would have wanted." 6 months later, the Chen Foundation for Family Safety opened its doors in downtown Seattle. We provided legal assistance, investigative services, and safe housing for women and children escaping fraudulent marriages and financial abuse. Our first client was a woman named Sarah, whose husband had been researching her family's business holdings while planning her accidental death in a skiing accident. Thanks to the protocols we'd established, Sarah's case was resolved in 2 weeks instead of months. Emma adapted to our new life with the resilience of childhood. She still missed the father she'd thought she'd known, but she'd begun to understand that the man who'd read her bedtime stories and the man who'd planned our murders were the same person. It was a hard lesson, but one that would make her stronger and more cautious in the future. On the anniversary of David's arrest, I stood in my father's memorial garden behind our new house, holding the business card that had started everything. Richard Harrison had attended our foundation's opening ceremony, proud of the justice his courage had made possible. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered to the memorial stone. "For the money, yes, but mostly for teaching me that strength comes from knowing your own worth." Emma ran up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Mommy, what are you thinking about?" "About how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things we do. Like helping other families?" Exactly like that. As we walked back toward our house, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, Catherine Williams, trapped in a marriage built on lies, working to support a man who was planning her murder. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger and more cautious, but also more compassionate. David had taught me that love could be a weapon, that trust could be exploited, that marriage could be a long con designed to steal everything from its victim. But he'd also taught me that survival was possible, that justice existed, and that sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up making us stronger than we ever imagined. The Chen Foundation's motto, inscribed on a plaque by our front door, summed up everything I'd learned. Strength is not avoiding the storm, but learning to dance in the rain. And for the first time in years, Emma and I were dancing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.